Hey guys, it's Smuggleby here for LeagueTopTen, and today I'm here to bring you the second part of our guide to how to play a certain role video series, and today we're talking about the carry role. Now, before we begin, we first have to explain what a carry is, because it can mean a couple of things. So first, let's define it. A carry is a champion who's designed to carry a team by way of damage and kills in the later stages of a game. They're supposed to be the primary source of damage for a team, and generally, if played properly, can lock down the largest threats posed by the enemy champions. In essence, the player carried, quote-unquote, their team to victory. Now, a lot of times, the term carry is also used when describing someone who is not a definitive carry, that's not his primary role, but still played the largest role in the victory for their team. Due to the kills or other factors, they ended up playing a more significant role than what they originally set out to do. Now, because of this, it can be a tad hard to accurately define which champions are carries and which ones are not, since technically almost any champion could carry a game given the right circumstances. So, for the sake of this video, I'm going to be defining a carry champion as a ranged or melee attack damage based fighter, and the reason I will do this and not include AP champions is because AP champions, while strong and they do a lot of damage, they rely solely on their abilities to do most of their damage. Thus, it's not sustainable, whereas a melee or ranged attack damage champion can sustain their damage in between abilities with auto attacks. Now, a guide for playing these quote-unquote AP nukers will be included in the series at a later time. So generally speaking, a carry starts off relatively underpowered in terms of damage. Compared to a nuker, their abilities do significantly less damage early on, but they scale much higher as the game progresses with attack damage. They rely heavily on high amounts of attack damage and for some attack speed. And it's for this reason they must farm a lot. Scoring kills is another high source of gold income for a carry. However, a carry shouldn't focus primarily on kills early on until at least probably mid-game. Now, if the opportunity arises to kill a player early on, I'm not saying don't take it. I'm just saying creeps are a much more sustainable income with far less risk involved, and you'll be a lot better off in the long run if you focus on that primarily. So there's two unique farming opportunities that come into play for carries, and they're often more tasked to use these opportunities than, say, a tank or any case of a support or a nuker. This is taking the solo lane mid and jungling. And jungling pretty much is only done by carries and sometimes tanks. By soloing middle, you can have the opportunity to not compete with anybody else for gold, except for obviously the enemy champion who you're facing off against, meaning that you have a larger maximum potential gold income for your lane. It also allows you to gain levels much quicker. Now, the second farming opportunity presents itself is the ability to jungle. So there's several champions that can jungle. For example, Yi can jungle, or Warwick can jungle, and Olaf, for the extent of the argument, can jungle as well. And a jungling champion, again, doesn't have to compete with another ally for creep kills, since he's only going to be in the jungle and killing jungle creeps primarily. And it allows you with masteries to level almost as quickly as if you're in a solo lane by yourself. One important thing to note as a solo carry or jungle carry is the need to gank. By getting a solo lane, notably mid or jungle lane, you theoretically have access to better items quicker, since you get more gold, than other lanes, as well as a higher level and more mobility in between lanes, being in middle or being in between the side lanes through the jungle. Now, being a good carry means taking advantage of this and ganking a lot if possible. However, there are some rules we need to put in place as to who and how we should gank or attack opponents in non-team fight situations as a carry. So, first of all, you need to choose the right time to gank. When an enemy is hugging the tower and it's full HP, that is not the time to gank, even if your allies are there and at full HP. Generally speaking, the best time to gank is when your lane has been pushed up a bit, so the enemy teams are past the line of the river, and they are hopefully a little bit lower in HP due to some harassment by your allies. When you pick up your target that you're actually going to gank, it's generally best to go for the squishiest target. However, you need to keep in mind a couple things. Number one, what summoner spells they have at their disposal, if they've used them or not, or if they have any abilities that they could use that would aid them in getting away. If your team is made up of people who are possibly friends of yours, and you're in like Vent or Skype or something like that, then they can tell you whether or not someone in that lane has used any kind of defensive cooldowns like Flash or Ghost, or any kind of cooldown they have at their disposal that allows them to, generate a gap between you and the opponent. getting your gold from these ways of farming or these ganking opportunities is a very high priority early on. Now, on the flip side of that, being overly aggressive early on can actually lead to your demise. Being greedy is perhaps the worst thing you could possibly do as a carry, especially if you have a kill streak going and you're worth a lot of money in return. All an enemy has to do, let's say if you tower dive him, is to stun you below a tower or kite you long enough for his ally to show up on the tower to kill you, making the 300 or so gold that you would have got for his kill worthless pretty much, because they would have got more than 300 for you if you had a kill streak going, plus the assists that the other enemy teammates would have got for helping in your kill. Even late game, being greedy can cost you the actual game, because let's say you die and you have a 35 to 40 second res timer, your team may not be able to adequately hold off the enemy team if they decide to push then, especially if, like, say they go to get Baron or something, and you could actually end up losing the game because you're not there for the team, you're not, the primary source of damage. Everybody else is building tanky or AP, and, they have magic resistance for that, or they have enough damage to just completely ignore the tanks in that situation. I know it's tempting to do that, to be greedy, but just don't. I mean, it happens to the best of us sometimes, but generally speaking, just don't do it. So now that we've got some over the basics, let's go ahead and talk about runes, masteries, spells, and items. Specifically summoner spells, rather. So for runes, there are pretty standard builds for carries. Armor and penetration for red is pretty much everything that all carries take, with very few exceptions, and those exceptions are generally reserved for select junglers. Yellow slots are filled with generally either dodge or MP5. Myself, I generally take dodge on the carry I jungle with, so that I can, reduce the damage I take, or I take MP5 for carries who have very spammy abilities, so that I don't have to take mana regen items and I can have a free open slot. Someone like Pantheon or Ashe would be a good example of a carry I'd take MP5 on. For blue, I'd really like going cooldown per level, although this area is a bit more lenient as to what you choose. But for me, myself, I generally just choose cooldown per level every time. And of course for quints, I always take flat HP quints. That extra HP helps you a lot in the early laning phases, and it can allow you to delay when you actually buy an extra HP item, if at all. And instead you can focus more on damage early on and not have to worry about building up some HP to mitigate that damage that you may receive. Now for masteries, if I'm going a non-jungle carry, I generally go for 2109 for range carries. For melee carries, I go some kind of variation of 12-17-1 or similar, just because I prefer the tankiness over the extra damage the offensive tree provides in team fights, since melee carries tend to be easier targets in team fights than range, because a range can kite, and a range can be at the back of the fight, meaning they don't have to take really defensive cooldowns or defensive masteries, because if they're a good range carry, they're not going to be getting hit. But again, this is largely up to preference. Some people may decide to go to full defensive cooldown and some utility for melee carries, or full offensive and some utility, or full offensive and some defensive. The one point in utility for myself is for the improved ghost. So, as for summoner spells, there is again a lot of leeway in what you choose and how you choose it. For range carries, I almost always go flashed and ghost. Or ghost and exhaust if I'm against a team with a lot of escape capabilities. What this does is this allows me to be very mobile and reposition myself in order to get the most out of the team fight or abilities. For melee carries, I almost always go ghost and either ignite or exhaust. Melee carries are more prone to being kited, and both ignite and exhaust assist you in keeping up with your enemy or filling in damage gaps if they're too far away for you to auto attack them and they're low on HP. I do sometimes take cleanse, but this is generally just for carries such as like Tryndamere or Yi, since they rely more on auto attacking during their ultimates than others, and a stun during those can actually cripple them. Now when it comes to items, just like when playing a tank, there is no straight build you should go when playing a carry. Early on, your first item that you're going to take is pretty much bar none either a offensive Doran's item like the dagger, or a defensive Doran's item like the shield, Generally, I take the defensive door and shield for melee carries, and the offensive dagger or sword for the range carries. Now, past that point, certain carries have certain items that they are pretty much mandatory and they have to take. For example, Warwick and Blood Razor, because that makes up a large portion of his damage and really synergizes extremely well with actually how he plays in his kit. But past that, you can actually basically build it how you would need to build it, depending on what you're up against and what they're doing to stack defensively against you. For your first items, a couple big items that you would get for a normal attack damage carry, I would go something like the Brutalizer, because it gives you cooldown, and it also obviously gives you some attack damage and armor penetration. That's great for low level, and it does a lot of damage at those low levels because people generally don't have a lot of armor built up at that time, or HP, and so it makes you pretty potent early on. Now on the flip side, if you're playing like a hybrid carry, like a Kali for example, I would go something like Ginsu's Rage Blade, or if you're going Jax for whatever reason, then yes, Ginsu's Rage Blade. That again plays up both sides of their passives and both sides of their attacks and allows you to do more damage. Now, when it comes to any kind of serious game you're playing, if you're thinking of going like a Soul Stealer or any kind of stack item, like for attack damage, don't. Unless you're like 5-0 on your first trip back to the fountain at level 8, it's generally not worth the gold, and unless you're extremely lucky in team fights, you won't see full stacks like 90% of the time. It's best to just put that money towards other guaranteed damage items. Really try to build mostly items that prioritize damage. Good items for melee carries would be like a Ghost Blade, since it gives you an attack speed boost, an armor pen, and it also increases your movement speed, making it easier for you to actually follow up and get close to them. Attack speed items generally overall are good, but shouldn't be your priority focus until you have some attack damage items first. Generally because, you need that higher attack damage to really benefit from higher attack speed. If you have low attack damage but high attack speed, you're not going to be doing overall that much damage if they have any kind of armor. This is especially true for someone that goes like Stark's Fervor. I've seen tons of people go Stark's Fervor, like rush that item as fast as possible. That item provides some armor pen, but no attack damage. So essentially you're just getting a little bit of lifesteal, and all they have to do to mitigate that is to stun you and kill you, and it makes that completely worthless. So going some attack damage early on really helps out. Now, there are situational items such as Last Whisper and Black Cleaver and Blood Razor for champions other than Warwick primarily. Those are really good for enemy team that are stacking HP and armor. On the flip side, if you're being focused a lot, then a Hexadrinker or Guardian's Angel are good defensive items, along with like Banshee's Veil to block that spell or block that stun that they may use to try to lock you down. Just choose the one that best fits the situation, really. Frozen Mallet and Crystal Scepter are good for their HP in the slow, but you shouldn't really be buying them for defensive situations since they're not the best, but they really don't offer anything more than HP for defense. They offer no armor or magic resist. So if someone has high amounts of damage or high attack, AP or something, then the HP isn't going to be really much of anything in the way of their attack damage because you have nothing to really mitigate that damage. You just have a couple of HP, and that's not going to matter very much. So let's talk about your positioning in team fights, okay? This is obviously a bit different when it comes to range carries versus melee carries. Range carries should never be at the front of the line or within enemy or melee range of anyone. Your job is simply to sit at the back and to pick people off with a tank or other team members in front of you. You're going to be focusing obviously the squishies, and so if you're in melee range, you're doing it wrong because they're going to be right next to you attacking you. This is why Ghost and Flash are very important to range carries. Because it helps you line up yourself for the best possible angle to use your abilities. Say, for example, Misfortune and, her R. If you use Flash, you can quickly get in line and use it against everybody in that line. Also, don't forget to kite as a ranged carry. If you're ranged and someone gets to you, you don't have to stand there and attack him. You can run away, get some distance between you, and hit him with either a summoner spell or your own spells to slow or stun him. kiting wins team fights more often than not. Get that distance between you. You don't have to be a melee range fighter all the time. For melee carries, you're obviously going to be in the thick of the battle more often, so you want to make sure to wait for your tank to initiate if possible. There are times when it may be okay for you to start the fight, but only if you know the enemy team is out of position and your tank will arrive before they can get into position. Generally, melee carries have some sort of defensive ability or passive which heals them or provides them armor. So using these at really key moments, such as when AoEs start flying around or you get focused, is a must. So by following these tips, you should be well prepared to take on the challenges of being an effective carry. As a recap, you need to farm often, gank if possible, don't be greedy with the ganks, prioritize the enemy team carries or squishies, let the tank initiate and position correctly in those team fights, and all of this done properly should ensure you a win for your team. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoy this guide to being an effective carry. If you have any questions or comments, please post them down below. If you did enjoy the video, please remember to like or favorite it, because it does help the video get noticed and it does help the channel grow larger. And next time we will be covering support champions in the next part of this series. Until then, this is Spunkify out. I'll see you later.